This week on Life Drives Success, we're going to learn how Michael Phelps kicked this guy's ass.
Well, he kicked the ass of the whole world, so I don't feel too bad about that.
Coming up next. We're not going to start with that. We're going to make people watch this for a while, but I'm excited to have you here. I think your story is phenomenal. So give us the quick view on it. Tell us how you even got to this room. Not that you physically walked here, but the story of you before this moment.
Yeah, well, I was a competitive swimmer my whole life. I was swimming year-round when I was 10 years old, and then continued to swim through college, and then even after college, post-collegiately for a while. So I was on the U.S. national swim team for 9 years and competed in the 2004 and the 2008 Olympic trials, where I, at both times, came within 0.3 of a second of making the U.S. Olympic swim team, which is kind of the pinnacle of success if you're a swimmer. So that was, really kind of crushing moment in my life personally. But after the 2008 Olympic trials, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do after swimming. I knew I was not going to continue to swim. I was already kind of old for a professional swimmer, and I wasn't making any money. So at a certain point, I kind of had to figure out, okay, what's next? And this kind of out of habit, I started teaching swim lessons, as I'd always done my whole life, and started teaching swim lessons to younger kids, 3, 4, 5-year-olds that were just kind of splashing around and having fun in the water. And I found I really enjoyed that, kind of rekindled a passion for swimming in me. And, I grew up right on Lake Michigan. My dad sold boats at the local marina, and my mom was a swim instructor. I was either at the beach or at the pool training, or one or the other in the summers here in Michigan. So I know that whatever I do in my life, I'm going to be around water. I can't be too far away from a pool or a lake or the ocean. So when I realized that teaching swimming was actually a viable career path, and I really enjoyed it, I started doing more of it, and eventually started Big Blue Swim School in Chicago in 2009. So from there, we started building, a lesson base, and realized, hey, let's be really smart and start a business in the middle of a recession, which we did, and it actually turned out to be a rather recession-resistant way to make a living in 2009. So, from there, we started building our own pools in 2012. We went to our families that were taking swim lessons from us and said, hey, this is actually a business concept we'd like to talk to you about. And we built our first pool in Wilmette in 2012. And since then, we've built 5 more locations in Chicagoland. And it's been a wild ride ever since. But, it all kind of started with that initial disappointment from my professional swimming career to kind of kindle a passion for doing something else bigger and greater and better. I really walked away from it still very hungry, if you will.
All right, so we're going to get into the business stuff in a second, but let's go back to even childhood. You got into competitive swimming at such an early age, and you and I have talked about this, that at that point the dream is probably the first dream is make it on the college team. Is that dream one?
Yeah, you hope to get a college scholarship. You hope to, at that time, go to junior nationals and then do U.S. nationals, swim for a big-time college program. In high school, I swam for the Goodwill Games U.S. teams. That dates me back when the Goodwill Games were a thing. And then competed for the U.S. on the World University Games team. So these are kind of some of the precursor national teams.
That's in high school.
To the Olympic team. In high school, I swam on the Goodwill Games team, and then in college, I was fortunate enough to go to college on a swimming scholarship, and then swam for the U.S. on the World University Games team against other college-aged kids.
When you're in high school, there's probably some internal hype that you're creating too. That's also pushing you to work as hard as you have to. It's not like there's probably some natural ability as a swimmer or as an athlete that's in your DNA. Call it whatever your parents gave you in the pool gave you an edge, but then it's what you do with it. When you're in high school, mentally, are you thinking I got a shot at the Olympics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. A lot of it is just God-given ability, but you got to meet that ability with a lot of hard work. If you kind of end up hating the word potential, because everybody told me you have all this great potential, It'd be such a waste if you didn't achieve your potential. Well, but then they're telling me my potential is, something that very, very few people can go pursue. So all I said to myself was I want to be able to walk away from swimming someday, having felt like, I got as close to my full potential as you can get. But yeah, absolutely. In high school, you're already starting to think about that as a competitive swimmer.
So in any sport, whether it's baseball or football or swimming, anything that could have Olympic or professional career off of, in high school, people start to pay attention to you a little bit differently because now they've recognized your potential. Is that hard to deal with from an ego standpoint or from a social standpoint? Because I mean, I loved playing the game of baseball, but no one was coming to me and saying, Nick, you got a shot at being a pro. Yeah, I wanted to be a pro in my head. I just didn't have the ability to do it. Does that change the way that you're addressing your life at that point? If you reflect back, did it?
Yeah, you look at a guy like Michael Phelps. He was on the cover of Time at 18 years old.
Right.
So you got to ask yourself, like, what would that do to me when I was 18? I give that guy a lot of credit for being as cool and normal as he is today.
It's a lot of pressure, right?
It's a lot of pressure, both external and then ultimately internal, the pressure you put on yourself. Now that you start to feel like, okay, some people read about me in the newspaper, even if it's just your local newspaper, you start to develop that the persona, if you will, that then you need to live up to that persona,
right?
Which is not always your authentic self, which can create problems for kids.
You and I have talked about the strength of relationship that obviously you have with your family too. How supportive were they throughout this, and did your parents ever buy into the hype, or were they more calmer about it to say keep working hard for your dream? Were they more like dream supporters, or did they have your back to try to bring you down to earth when all these people that you, whether it's college coaches or anybody saying, dude, you could make it?
Yeah, I mean, at a very young age, I was supposed to be a tennis player. My uncles and aunts, they were all very into tennis, played at some high levels, and I hated tennis from an early age. So as soon as I found my own path in swimming, it was kind of freeing because no one in my family knew anything about competitive swimming,
right?
High-level competitive swimming. So I could kind of carve my own path in that regard, which was nice. And I got to say, my parents and my one sibling, my younger brother, were my biggest cheerleaders, biggest fans, and did everything they could, I think, to make sure that there wasn't too much pressure.
Yeah, if you don't have that solid foundation, no matter what you're doing, whether it's in business or sports or anything that you're trying to accomplish, if you don't have that, you're gonna like it makes it even more difficult to go through the ups and downs of whatever that journey is.
Yeah, I think the key to success is the ability to recover, because you're going to push yourself to your limit if you're pursuing something aggressively. If you have big goals, you're eventually going to hit that limit. And it's those people that can, in the midst of the chaos, find time to come back to center and replenish and recover, even when some people may have a tendency to overanalyze and keep thinking about it and never really shut down, which was certainly something that I was guilty of as a kid and even today as an adult. But if you can't recover, you're never going to be able to come back the next day and perform at your best.
Right.
And that'll eventually get to you. I think that's what leads to burnout, both in sports and even in business too.
Or relationships.
In relationships. You got to have relationships that help you kind of restore your energy as opposed to drain your energy. So I was fortunate enough and still fortunate enough to have a really good support group.
That's awesome. So, and we're going to get into the hype of now where you're at in business in a little bit, because I see parallels in that as well. Okay. So we're in college. You still have all the potential. Is that when you do the first Olympic trial?
That's right. Yeah, 2004. Well, actually, I swam my first Olympic trials in 2000. I was I think the second youngest guy at the meet, and that was a really cool experience to see just people I looked up to and idolized. So that was my first.
The greatest swimmers, arguably in the world.
Yeah, the greatest swimmers in the world. I mean, to be on the U.S. Olympic swim team is basically means if you're on that team, you're probably a medalist or close to being a medalist. The U.S. has always dominated swimming.
So at the first trials, what were your expectations?
No expectations. It was so much fun. I just wanted to get out there and compete. And I think I was 16, and there's probably like 50 guys in the country make the cut to swim at the Olympic trials, and then the top 2 in every event make the Olympic team. And so I was just there, and I was like, I think I placed somewhere in the 40s, and I was like, this is so cool. So that was the first kind of taste of competing at that high level. And then 2004 was...
And you wanted it more because you tasted it.
Exactly.
For the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a guy my age was making the Olympic team. So that was cool to see that. Like, okay, I got some work to do. Both Aaron Pearsall and Michael Phelps, even a year younger than me, were making the Olympic team that year, which was pretty cool to witness in person.
So now you get the taste, and now you want it. So the next 4 years, was that the hardest you've ever worked in your life?
No, the 4 years after that, probably. But the next 4 years, I also trained very, very hard. And even got to a point kind of halfway through that quadrennial where I was swimming the slowest I've ever swum in my life. Just from training, overtraining.
So exhaustion.
Yeah, exactly. Not exhaustion, not recovering, really.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then those trials, what happened?
It was kind of crazy. I went into the finals, so that's the top 8 after prelims and then semifinals, seeded 3rd. So, and it was a distant 3rd. It was behind the 2 best backstrokers in the world by a long distance at that time, both Michael Phelps and Aaron Pearsall, the world record holder at the time. So those 2 guys were going in, and they were battling it out for who was going to be first, who was going to be second, basically. And it was in Long Beach, California. And so I was going in 3rd, and to me, 3rd was as good as last, right? It's the Olympic trials. There were no medals for 3rd place. So in the finals, I just went for broke and took it out with those guys. I went as fast as I possibly could. And I think at the midway point in the race, I split with them, which was my fastest 100-meter time at the time. So it was a really painful second 100 meters of the race. But
you felt you had nothing to lose.
And nothing to lose. Unfortunately, right before the race, the head Olympic team coach, a guy named Eddie Reese, who's kind of like the John Wooden of swimming, he was the coach of Aaron Pearsall. He was the only guy in the world that knew Pearsall was going to beat Phelps. Phelps was on a meteoric rise at that point.
Yeah.
In 2004. So everybody, including myself, thought Phelps would win. And so what happened was Pearsall not only won, he won by such a large margin that Phelps decided to drop that from his Olympic repertoire. And Eddie Reese told me before the race, you should try to get 3rd in this race, because he knew that Pearsall was going to beat him. And I didn't believe him. And I thought, well, if that's even true, then, but Michael's coach would tell my coach the same thing, that there's a possibility, and go compete for 3rd place and see what I can do. That wasn't the case. So I got 4th by a slight margin.
You're confident you would have got 3rd had you not pushed yourself.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. But had I not, gone for broke, I felt really good in the day before in the semifinals, and I think I probably could have had a better race.
Yeah.
So what ultimately happened was the guy who got 3rd got bumped up onto the Olympic team the next day. And so that was what motivated me to train harder than I've ever trained before between 2004 and 2008.
So before we get to 2008, so it's both an individual and team sport. So do you look at, how do you look at your peers in that? Is it Do you both love them and hate them in swimming?
I mean, no, I went, at least the guys I trained with, I all loved and respected.
Yeah.
And, whatever happens at the end of the day happens. You maybe have people from other teams or other countries you're competing against that you don't know that you want to really just beat. But you go through so much kind of pain and agony and exhaustion in training together in a training group that at least I personally never had any animosity towards anybody. You go out there, you compete the best you can, and it's kind of like you see these boxers, they beat the crap out of each other.
And hug each other.
And then they hug each other. Yeah, it's just what they do.
It's the sport.
It's just the sport, yeah.
So, but finishing third, or in this case, fourth, I mean, it's got to be both the best thing and the worst thing to happen to you as an athlete at that point. The worst thing is you were that close to being there. So it's like, it's not just good that you got to participate anymore. When you're 16, it's cool that you're there. When you're that close, it's like, you could taste what your entire life of an athlete led up to that point. And then the good of it is then that creates the fuel for what could happen potentially in 2008.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always liked ending a season with some level of disappointment because you could carry it into the next season, really hungry and excited to go not let that happen again. There's a lot of character building moments in swimming, as in business. And so, there's definitely no shortage of those disappointments, no matter how good you are. Even Phelps, Lochte, they'll walk away from meets disappointed that something didn't quite go their way. It's too hard of a sport to get perfect.
So what happened in 2008?
So then, I trained with Phelps every day between 04 and 08 and trained the hardest I've ever trained and got in the best shape of my life. And in 2007, the summer preceding the Olympic trials year, I was 5th in the world in the 200 backstroke, but I was 4th in the U.S. So the U.S., like I said, is just really strong, especially in the events that I swam. So I was just behind, Pearsall, Phelps, and Ryan Lochte, and then I was like the next guy. So same thing kind of happened again, where I got really close and was competing up at that level. But again, missed the Olympic team by a few tenths of a second. And at that point, the couple of guys ahead of me had contracts. They were making a living. They were, competing. And unfortunately, at that time, there just wasn't a whole lot of funding for people to continue to swim professionally unless they were one of the big names.
Right.
So kind of out of necessity, I was like, this has been fun, but it's time for me to do something else. I'm excited to do something else.
So not depressed.
I wouldn't say depressed. I was confused, frustrated.
How long does that take to wear off?
It kind of never does in a sense, but where you're no longer paralyzed. For me, I had to go. I think I came back home and helped my uncle gut a house for a week, just kind of mindless manual labor.
Actually, those walls took a great beating.
That's true. But, that helped. And then, like I told you, I really kind of found joy again teaching swim lessons. And one of my favorite quotes, I'm not even sure where it comes from, but it's okay to quit 1,000 times as long as your feet never stop moving. And so, my wife, she runs a marathon. She said that she loves that quote too, because in a marathon, you almost kind of feel like, okay, I'm going to quit at the next mile. I'm going to quit at the next mile. But something in you just kind of has to keep moving, just something. Right. Even if you tell yourself and you give yourself permission to think, okay, I'm quitting, I'm done. Or maybe I'm taking a new path in life, but something in you is still pushing you to be the best you can be and approach self-actualization and be the best version of yourself. Even though I'm not doing that in a competitive swimming pool anymore, I still feel the same exact drive that I always felt.
And 2004 ends up, probably 2002, it ends up teaching you, it gave you that internal hunger, because at the end of the day, you didn't quit in 2000, you didn't quit in 2004, you may have not made what your goal was, but you were ready to keep going. It gives you the opportunity to say, how do I recover, which is what we're talking about in the beginning. And now look out business world, because that ship just only grew because you didn't make the Olympics, and you learned recovery, and you know motivation, and you talked about training harder than you ever trained between 4 and 2008. Now you figure out this momentum in the business world, and we'll get to where Big Blue's at now, but you can look at the projections. You're going to kick ass in business now, but does that start to play into your motivation when you start teaching and thinking about this business? Is all that still inside you? Is that ship motivating you?
Yeah, I think you always have to find a way to remain hungry, right? I don't think I'd ever be happy just sitting on the beach doing nothing forever. I think that's just part of my makeup, and honestly, a gift, I think, more so that I was given by my parents, to continue to just keep pushing forward and to thrive as an individual. And you need to appreciate the value of hard work.
Yeah,
I was fortunate enough to have that instilled in me by my parents. And obviously not everybody gets that gift as a kid. I don't take credit for my work ethic. That was gifted to me. So that's a big part of it. But also too, that self-earned disappointment and that chip on your shoulder that you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, that's really important. I watched Phelps every day in practice. The guy had chips on his shoulder a lot, and was incredibly competitive, and used that to his motivation. And I definitely learned a lot from watching that, because when you have that fuel, you can do anything. And that's what he did. He went out and he shocked the world in 2008. And so, if you can take that disappointment and that chip on your shoulder and turn it into a positive, you're actually, you end up being kind of grateful for those disappointments. With
some of the life experience that you went through, and you had stability on the personal side with your family, obviously. Mm-hmm. Has it, skeptical might be too big of a word, but do you feel more cautious to trust in just life or business, like that you need to cut the cards first because you've seen what happens if you believe too much in winning?
I would say it's an interesting question. I would say you put a little less stock in what winning will do for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually very healthy and a very good thing that comes out of losing. But you don't ever stop pushing just as hard to achieve your goals.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, if I look back on my business career, I failed as an athlete much faster than you did. Maybe that's my blessing.
That's how you define failure.
Right. But it's interesting because if we were going to draw a line down the middle of what's winning and what's losing, and some look at it as half full, some look at it as half empty, like the life experiences that you have up to that point changes it. So every day that I come into this, even though technically I lost at the last job that I was at because it didn't work out the way that I had hoped, I never saw it that way. I always saw it as moving forward. And I think the hardest part as an athlete is even take a professional basketball player. Their careers are pretty much done at 35. A football player could be done at 25. Everything that you build up for that moment. So it's interesting because I think what you were talking about in recovery is so valuable to even finding success again in whatever you're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, in business, you can start to feel burnt out rather quickly when you just want to drive and push and push and push, and you feel like you're not actually accomplishing anything because these are, you're working on big, long, quarterly or yearly projects, and you don't feel like you're making any progress on a day-to-day basis. But you're pushing as hard as you can push. If you can't take a step back and say, hey, I actually am making progress, and I can actually stop thinking about work for a period of time. I'm just watching the best in the world do what they do, and personal life experience learn that it's not just a nice to have, it's imperative. And then you also touched too on remaining positive. I used to think it was kind of a trite saying that didn't really mean much when I think it was Colin Powell said that optimism is a force multiplier.
Right.
It starts to make a lot more sense the older I get. It really is a choice to maintain that optimism. And when you do, just how much it impacts everything around you. It really is incredible. I used to be, I think, actually more pessimistic before disappointment.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense, than I am now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because at the end of the day, I mean, there's very little that we can control as humans, but what you just said is in the control of every human being.
Exactly.
You decide how you're going to look at things. You decide if you're going to be optimistic or pessimistic. You decide if you're going to be positive or negative. I mean, that's your control. Yeah. No one can. Forces can influence your mood.
Yeah.
But it's your choice.
Exactly. I mean, life's full of possibilities. Actually, I read a great book, and the study that was done was on people who won the lottery versus people who had a traumatic injury and actually like lost a limb in a car accident or something like that.
Yeah.
And a year later, the people who had gone through a traumatic injury were actually showing higher signs of just happiness and how they gauged happiness than people who had won the lottery. We have really strong emotional immune systems to deal with the big disappointments in life. It's terrible.
Yeah.
We have terrible immune systems for like things like traffic and getting stuck in the checkout line that takes too long. We're really bad at that. But when the big things happen, we're actually very good at it if we know how to harness that disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, our DNA, our life, our parents, our grandparents, everybody has had to battle through some sort of shit. Like every single human being, and hopefully over time, our ability to recover continues to get better. Most likely we're going to deal with death in our lives of people that we love. How do we recover from that? How do we move forward? And there's plenty of sayings of people that have lived enough life to try to guide the next generation on what it's going to be like. But it's hard. All these things are hard, but then it's what you do with it. So what I can see as, call it an insider outsider in the position that I have now, I think you're doing the same thing again, and you already have. You're private equity backed. That means you had to do enough of that hustle and right things to get to that point. You've awarded your first franchise already, yeah. So it's coming. Like you're prepping for 2008 again, but the difference is, I think your life story is controlling more of the variables that makes it that you're not thinking about third. You're already in first. You know what I'm saying?
We're definitely not. I'm definitely not guessing anymore. And to touch on your point too, I mean, I had disappointment in life, but I was fortunate enough to have people in my life that helped me keep perspective. So it wasn't like I had to learn life's lessons on an actual battlefield.
Yeah, right.
I learned them in a pool.
Right.
There's some nice safe guardrails on that. So, keeping that perspective and understanding, like, I had some disappointment, but I'm not actually starving. My family actually has, means to feed ourselves, and we have a warm bed at night. Like, things were never that bad, and I think I credit my parents to help me keep that perspective, which is also really important. And now as we move forward into thinking about, okay, what's next for Big Blue Swim School, all those lessons and all that perspective and all that chip on my shoulder, I've got again the right people in my life and the right mentors to help bottle that up and then direct it into the right outlets for success. And we're no longer as an organization just kind of hoping people show up for swim lessons. We have a real professional private equity partner in Level 5 Capital that is evolving Big Blue Swim School faster than I could have ever imagined. And like you said, we've awarded our first 5 franchises, and we have many, many more in our pipeline. So if things keep going the way they're going, you're right. We're not thinking about third. We're thinking about first, and we're starting to prepare for what does 2025 look like with hundreds of locations around the country.
Do you, in 2004, you have to close your eyes and think about what 4 years, you have to envision what 4 years from now looks like, because that's what you're going to fight for. Mm-hmm. Do you still close your eyes and think about what does 2025 look like now in business? Are you applying the same things, or have you changed your mindset a little bit more to be more dialed in the moment? Has it changed?
No, I think you have to go through a visioning exercise, no matter what you're doing. even for our business, even if it's big goals or small goals, even if it's just an initiative, I force people to start with, what does the vision look like a quarter from now when this is done, or maybe 5 years from now when this is done? What does Big Blue Swim School look like post whatever initiative we're talking about at the time? I think that's a really key, important part of any successful initiative, is to get buy-in from the group to understand, what can this look like down the road. So you have to have that, while at the same time, not getting too lost in what does tomorrow look like when there's a lot of work to be done today.
What does a bad day look like for you today?
Not enough time spent talking to the people on my team. I think the most valuable time I can spend is time talking to other Big Blue team members and our private equity partners, and making progress. When I get stuck with some kind of fire that needs to be put out, and we're not having our one-on-ones, we're not having our weekly check-ins, that gets frustrating for me. That's a bad day.
How do you recover?
Go home and play with my two sons. One's 7 months old, one's 2.5, and they're, you've been through it. That helps you really kind of ground yourself and get back to, and resets to zero. And my wife is awesome too. So got a really good family unit at home to help get through the good times and bad times. It's
interesting how life, and it doesn't work out this way for everybody, but how life ends up working. You have a support system when you're a kid, and you don't have someone, and then you build your own family. And I mean, I have the same thing. I could have a crappy day, and I get a little bit of time to think about it when I'm getting home, and then I get home, and I have 2 little boys that their bad day is probably they either didn't get enough nap time, or they didn't get the snack that they wanted, or they didn't go get electronics. Right?
I'm not that different. Not enough nap time, not enough snacks. It's not a good day.
Yeah, so it's like it's interesting to just see how things come full circle, and I appreciate your view on this, because I think from a life moment, you at the end of the day, you got to experience something that a lot of Americans put on a pedestal, that what you were able to even taste is something that so many human beings would love to just have that experience. And it's cool to be able to see how you're cross-applying that to your life today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to talk about it and share that story. I've always kind of felt that the best stories in sport are not always on a podium. There's all kinds of great stories out there when you go talk to athletes at all levels, because so much of what is learned in the pool or on the court or in the field is applicable to what's going on in real life beyond sports.
Well, you think about it. I mean, Phelps gets the cover of Time because of how powerful and game-changing he was. But the reality is, the story that you just told will resonate with a much larger audience, because many more people have had to battle not being able to find their pathway to their first dream and then apply it to their next, than have been born into this world as a superstar, and that's why I appreciate you telling this story with our audience. When you and I first talked about this at a Cubs game over beers, and I was super fascinated by it, because I think it's incredible that it's the recovery, that you've been able to recover and apply the same mechanics to business. I mean, we're sitting in the owner's seats. So for you to be able to recover and get a business into being in the forefront of the business community, it will be, and it's going to continue to be, is impressive. It's really cool to hear that story.
Well, thank you, Nick. I love sharing it. I love talking to you.
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
As you can see, life drives success.